There is one assumption that most modern people trust completely, even though they rarely say it out loud. It is the belief that this world runs on fixed rules that cannot be broken, that stone cannot produce life, that fire always burns, that time can only move forward, that when life ends, everything ends right there. That quiet belief makes people feel safe because if everything has limits, then at least they think they live in a world they can predict. But what happens if all those limits exist for just one reason? Because Allah allows them to exist. What if the rules people call unchangeable are actually just a thin curtain covering a truth that is bigger, deeper, and far more unsettling? That nothing in this universe decides its own fate by itself. The history of the prophets does not begin with war or bloodshed, and it begins with the collapse of the things people thought were certain. Moments when stone becomes soft, fire loses its power, time stops moving, and death is no longer the final line. These are not fairy tales stitched together to amaze you. They are signs sent down at the very moments when humanity had gone too far in its own self-satisfaction. Every miracle is not random. It appears right when people start believing they understand enough about the world that they no longer need God. When knowledge makes people lift their heads too high, those signs force them to bow again. Not through violence, but through the complete breakdown of the logic they used to lean on. Try to imagine what it feels like to stand in front of a rock that has seemed motionless for thousands of years and then watch life come out of it. And try to imagine seeing fire, the thing you have known since childhood as the symbol of destruction, suddenly become gentle like a cool breeze. Try to imagine taking a short sleep, then waking up in a world that has aged by centuries. Those moments do not just terrify people. They force a basic question back onto the table. Who is really controlling this reality? Right at that intersection where fear and awakening become one, the history of the prophets begins to speak. Not to tell people how powerful Allah is, that was never what needed proving, but to point to something much harder to accept, that every limit people place on their own faith is something they built themselves. And when Allah decides to remove those limits even for a moment, an entire civilization can collapse from a single sign. No swords, no armies. It's just the raw truth appearing in front of hearts that have grown used to turning away. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we do not just retell history, we step into the moments that made history stop and listen. The stories you are about to hear are not miracles people mention all the time. They are forgotten signs, events that made the heavens and the earth submit and forced people to face how small they really are. Before we continue this journey, please subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support and walk with us. Your support is what gives us the drive to keep telling these deeper stories, the lessons hidden by time in a complete and honest way. Because when limits fall, when the impossible becomes real, the question is no longer what Allah can do. The question is, will people choose to believe it, or will they turn away one more time? People often think that anything without consciousness has no role in the story of faith. Stone is just stone, fire is just fire, water is just water. They exist, they serve people, and then they get forgotten. But the history of the prophets has repeatedly turned that view upside down. In humanity's most decisive moments, the things people call lifeless become the clearest witnesses to the truth people keep trying to avoid. There are times when words no longer work, when people have heard too much, argued too long, and convinced themselves that truth is just one opinion among many. In those moments, Allah does not send down new arguments. He makes creation itself speak, not in human language, but through action that makes every excuse collapse. A rock, the symbol of hardness, stillness, and silence, and suddenly becomes the place where life comes out. Not from a seed, not from a mother's womb, but from what people believed was completely dead. That moment does not just shock the witness, it exposes an uncomfortable truth. The issue was never whether Allah can produce a sign. The issue is whether people are willing to accept it. Fire is the same. In the human mind, fire is the final boundary between life and death. It does not show mercy, it does not discriminate, it does not hesitate. But when Allah commands, fire loses the very nature people assumed it owned. What was made to destroy becomes gentle, even protective. This is not just a dramatic visual miracle. It is a deep message. No power in this universe is self-made, no matter how familiar people are with it. Water, the most basic source of life, is not outside that order either. And people are used to water flowing by habit, appearing where they expect it, disappearing when they stop paying attention. But there are moments when water does not flow by terrain. It flows by command. It bursts from the driest place not only to keep life going, but to heal wounds that time and suffering have piled up for years. In those moments, water does not just cool the body, it reveals something. What truly heals is not the water, but the will of the one who created it. What all these miracles share is not how strange they look, but why they happen. Allah does not turn stone into life to challenge science. He does not make fire cool to show off power. He does not bring water forth to soothe physical pain alone. These signs appear when people begin worshiping the rules instead of the one who set the rules. When stone, fire, and then water become witnesses, people can no longer blame ignorance or confusion. What they see is not vague, not symbolic, not something that needs complicated interpretation. It happens right in front of them, inside the familiar world they thought they understood. And that is why the human response becomes more important than the miracle itself. Some people see it and become humble. Some people see it and become afraid. But some people see it and still turn away. Because accepting that truth would mean giving up the center seat they have assigned themselves. In that moment, stone is no longer just stone, fire is no longer just fire, water is no longer just water. They become the dividing line between faith and arrogance, between awakening and stubbornness. History shows that Allah does not need to turn the whole world into a miracle. While one moment where lifeless creation behaves differently than people expect is enough to expose how fragile every ego-based certainty really is. And in those moments, the question is not, can this happen? But what will I do now that I have seen it? Because when the heavens and the earth speak, human silence is no longer innocent. Nothing convinces people that they are in control more than time. Time measures age, measures success, measures failure, measures pain and memory too. People are used to looking at a clock to know where they are in life, and looking in a mirror to see how far they have gone. That is why they believe time is fair, objective, and impossible to shake. But the history of the prophets reveals something else, something deeper and more frightening. Time is not the ruler. It is another creation obeying a command. And there are people who fall asleep with a mind full of worry, then wake up in a world that has completely changed. For them, it feels like a short break, a brief pause in consciousness. But outside, hundreds of years have passed. One generation replaced another, power rose and fell, a faith once oppressed became ordinary. Meanwhile, bodies lying in the dark did not age, did not decay, were not worn down by time. When they open their eyes, time is the one that feels out of place. Stories like that are not meant to entertain the imagination. They force a question people usually avoid. If time can be compressed, stretched, or almost stopped by Allah's will, then where does the value we assign to time really come from? Do we worship time simply because we feel helpless in front of it? Life and death carry the same illusion of power. People treat death as the final border, the door that slams every possibility shut. But in the history of the prophets, death is not always the end. There are people who truly cross death not for a moment, but for decades. The heart stopped, The breath ended, the body returned to the earth. The world kept moving without them. And then, when the appointed moment arrived, life was returned as if it had never been taken away. What makes those moments so heavy is not only that the dead come back. It is the cold contrast between two realities. Food stays fresh, while the bones of something else have already crumbled. One side is total preservation, the other is complete decay. Both exist in the same scene, like a reminder that survival or breakdown does not depend on time. It depends on the will of the one who controls it. And miracles tied to time and life and death are not sent to comfort people with "everything will be fine." They shake the false safety people build for themselves. They force an uncomfortable truth. You do not truly understand life just because you are alive, and you do not truly understand death just because you fear it. When time stops being linear, human priorities start to look fragile. Things that once felt urgent, important, impossible to delay suddenly seem small when you place them next to centuries passing in what feels like a single breath. Worries that once filled the mind can disappear with a generation, while one act of faith can echo far beyond the lifetime of the person who did it. The history of the prophets does not tell these stories to push people to escape reality. And it tells them to remind you that the reality you cling to is only a very thin slice of a much larger picture. When Allah allows people to touch that slice, even briefly, every familiar definition of living, dying, waiting, and losing has to be re-examined. And that is where a miracle stops being a strange, supernatural event. It becomes a mirror reflecting how you are using the time you have been given. Because if a sleep can last centuries, if death can be a pause, then the real question is not how long will I live, but what did I live for? These stories do not explain time. They strip away the illusion that people can own it. And in that emptiness, faith finally has room to stand. There is a very common misunderstanding people carry about miracles. They think that if they could see one with their own eyes, and if they could touch it with their senses, then faith would automatically appear. That if Allah would only give a sign clear enough, strong enough, doubt would vanish, and the heart would surrender. But the history of the prophets tells a different story, colder and harder to accept. Miracles do not create faith. They reveal what was already inside the person. There are communities that witnessed signs no honest mind could deny. Signs that were not vague, not symbolic, not something you could call a coincidence. They happened publicly, repeatedly, and directly affected daily life. And yet, instead of becoming humble, many people became defensive. Instead of reflecting, they tried to rationalize. Instead of changing, they tightened their grip on power and on the habits they refused to release. And this is what makes a miracle such a severe test. Accepting it means giving something up. For some, it is power. For others, it is social status, financial advantage, or the image they spent a lifetime building. A miracle does not demand blind belief. It demands honesty. And that is a demand many people are not willing to meet. When a sign comes, it does not force the choice, but it makes the choice impossible to avoid. After that moment, no one can say they did not know. No one can claim the evidence was not enough. That is why a miracle carries enormous moral weight. It raises the responsibility of the one who witnessed it, and it shrinks the gray zone where people usually hide so they do not have to decide. History shows a painful paradox. The more some people see, the harder they become. Not because they do not understand, but because they understand exactly what the truth will require of them. In those moments, the miracle is not a gift, it is a mirror of arrogance. It does not destroy people by force. It destroys them by exposing the choice they kept postponing. There are people who ate from a provision sent from a place no one could reach, then turned away as soon as life felt normal again. There are people who were rescued from disaster but treated it like a temporary interruption, not a wake-up call. And there are people who, after witnessing sign after sign, became even more aggressive, as if truth itself was a threat that needed to be crushed. This shows an uncomfortable truth. The issue was never the size of the miracle. The issue is the state of the heart when the miracle appears. A humble heart treats a sign like an invitation. A fearful heart treats it like a warning. But a heart ruled by arrogance treats a miracle like a personal insult, a challenge to the control it refuses to surrender. That is why in the history of the prophets there are times when miracles stop coming. Not because Allah lacks power, but because every excuse has been removed. When the last sign has appeared, when truth has stood naked in front of the eyes, the silence that follows is not abandonment, it is judgment. In that sense, a miracle is not a shortcut to salvation. It is a marker, a clear boundary between the person willing to change and the person choosing stubbornness to the end. After that boundary, consequences stop being random. They become the direct result of a choice made in the full light of truth. These stories are not told to spread fear, and they are told to break a dangerous illusion that a person can delay faith until conditions feel convenient. History shows that once truth is on the table, delay is not neutral anymore. It is a choice, and a miracle in its strictest role is what makes that choice irreversible. Because once the lights are on, darkness cannot pretend it did not see the road. After stories of stone producing life, fire turning cool, time being compressed, and death no longer acting like the final period, a quiet truth appears, deeper than everything the eye can witness. Most people will never see a miracle with their own eyes. Most will never stand in front of moments that make the universe feel like it has stopped breathing. But that does not mean miracles have ended. The history of the prophets is not meant to make people chase supernatural events, and it is meant to bring them to a harder realization. The most lasting miracles do not happen outside you. They happen inside you. They do not shake mountains, but they shake the ego. They do not terrify crowds, but they force one lonely person to face themselves. Some people are not healed immediately, but they are given the ability to endure without losing dignity. Some people are not removed from hardship, but they are given a heart strong enough not to break inside that hardship. Some prayers do not change the situation, but they completely change how a person walks through it. These are not loud miracles. They do not look impressive, but they quietly rebuild a life from the ground up. In history, some prophets are not remembered for miracles that flipped nature upside down, but for a steadiness that did not bend under pressure. Self-control when power was within reach. Justice when emotions wanted to overrule reason. Loyalty to a promise even when nobody was watching. Those victories do not leave monuments for the world to admire, but they leave an ethical pattern time cannot erode. People often ask why Allah does not give them miracles the way He gave them to earlier generations. But maybe the better question is, if we were placed in the same tests, would we keep faith without a blinding sign to guide us? Because miracles can shock you in a moment, but patience and silence is much harder to maintain. A miracle can happen once, but honesty with Allah must be renewed every day. There is a kind of miracle people rarely notice while it is happening, the ability to return, the ability to admit you were wrong when no one is accusing you, and the ability to ask forgiveness even when the consequences are still there. The ability to stand back up after failure without letting bitterness become hatred. Those moments do not enter history books, but they are written deep into the spiritual life of the people who live through them. The history of the prophets shows that Allah does not promise an easy life for believers. He promises that suffering is not meaningless. Not one tear falls without being known. Not one act of patience is forgotten. And not one sincere prayer is ignored, even if the answer comes in a way that forces a person to wait, or to learn how to release their own expectations. When you look back at the great miracles of the past, the goal is not to wish you lived in that time. The goal is to realize we live in the era of quiet miracles. Every breath that continues when you thought you could not go on. Every time the heart softens after you thought it turned to stone. Every time a person chooses not to take revenge, not to give up, not to betray what they know is right. These are not the moments that make the world pause and stare, but they are enough to change the direction of a soul. And maybe that is the miracle the history of the prophets is leading you toward. Not being overwhelmed by power, but being transformed by faith. Not witnessing the impossible, but living with integrity when everything looks ordinary. Because when miracles are not happening in front of your eyes, the choice to believe or to turn away becomes even purer. In the end, these stories do not ask what you have seen. They ask who you have become after listening. And inside that question, and the miracle is still happening quietly day after day in hearts willing to be changed. The deepest lesson from all of this is simple. Faith is not waiting for something extraordinary to happen. It is living the right way even when everything feels ordinary. Applying that today means learning patience in hardship, holding on to principles when you are tested, and returning to Allah even when the answer has not come yet. That is how everyday life becomes a meaningful journey, where every choice carries the weight of faith. If these stories have reached you, if they made you stop and reflect on yourself, join the Prophetic History Explained community so we can keep exploring the deeper lessons from the history of the prophets about faith, patience, repentance, and the true meaning of life. And do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us, so we have the drive to create more valuable content in the time ahead. This journey will continue, and you are an important part of it.